Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here, for cutting your lunch short, and being here to listen to the presentation. My name is Claudia Jiménez. I head up the corporate development activities of TiGenix. Been with the company now 9 years. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to excuse Eduardo Bravo, the CEO, who I would have loved to be here. He's been talking about coming here and presenting the achievements for a long time. But unfortunately, he's traveling now extensively, so he couldn't make it. Let me just see how I advance this. Sorry. So again, we're a public listed company, so bear with me with this slide. We have forward-looking statements which may not materialize, so just for you to keep in mind. But just, I think TiGenix is known to most of you, but for the benefit of those of you who don't know TiGenix, we're a Belgian company. We're headquartered in Leuven, but we have the majority of our operations today in Spain, and actually about 90 to 95% of our workforce is actually based in Madrid today. We have approximately 70 employees. We're listed on Euronext. As most of the companies always like to say, we're drastically undervalued, so we're worth today 166 million euros. Have a couple of big investors, so there's 3 pharma companies who are in the share capital of our companies, Grifols, Genetics, and Novartis. Together they hold 28% of the shares, the remaining being free float. 6 analysts covering the stock and 22 million euros in the bank. So this slide shows you the pipeline that we have, and I think what I'd like you to stick with is we work in 3 different platforms. First platform, which is the most advanced, is our expanded adipose-derived stem cell platform, which has 2 products today in clinical development, 601, which is the local delivery of the stem cells, and 611, which is the IV delivery of the stem cells. I'll go more in detail into 601 in a minute. We have a second platform, which is the result of a recent acquisition that we did, the acquisition of Core Therapeutics. And that's where we brought into a platform of allogeneic cardiac stem cells, which we're pushing forward in 2 different developments, allo-CSC01 and allo-CSC02. And lastly, you see on the bottom the characterized autologous chondrocytes. This is the heritage product from the former TiGenix, the Belgian company. Chondroselect was the first product to actually make it into the market, the first advanced therapeutic medicinal product to make it into the market in Europe. Not only was it able to make it into the market, it was able to achieve reimbursement in a couple of countries, which in Europe is sometimes a lot more challenging than actually bringing the product through the clinical development. So with this, let me go into 601, which will be the main topic today. Again, when we started developing 601 about 11 years ago, this was our plan. The first picture was really our plan. We thought it was going to go very smooth, and within a couple of years, we would be in the market, with a successful phase 3. 11 years down the road, we look back and see, the road behind us is the second picture. We started development with an autologous product, actually, which we brought through the phase 1, phase 2, and 2 different phase 3s. The first phase 3 failed. This is the big pond that you see there. And then we went back into market. We shifted the focus into the allogeneic, did a small phase 2A to confirm that we could safely deliver repeated doses of AACs. And then you see those dark clouds. Those dark clouds are actually after the phase 2, when we started doing our phase 3, and all the pharma companies that talked to us expressed very clearly to us that nobody believed we were going to be able to make it through a successful phase 3 with the design that we had, and it's a tough patient population, etc. But finally, again, 11 years later, we're there. On the 24th of August, we were very happy to announce that we had achieved a successful phase 3. We had met the primary endpoint with statistical significance. Not only did we meet the primary endpoint with statistical significance, it was met with a p-value below 0.025, okay, which is a very, very stringent p-value. The reason for this p-value was that we had agreed with EMA that this was going to be a single pivotal trial, and for it to be eligible for registration needed to be successful under this stringent p-value. Okay, so just to tell you a little bit about the product and the indication, I'm not sure you know the indication. It's definitely not the nicest of the indications after lunch, but it's basically, so you know that Crohn's disease patients, they develop on a very recurrent basis fistulas. Fistulas are abnormal connections between somewhere in the inside of the body and the outside. We focus on perianal fistulas, which obviously connect the rectum with the outside in a channel that should not be there. It's a pretty debilitating disease. So the fistulas have suppuration. They are painful. Patients do not have a great quality of life. Around 11% of the Crohn's disease patients suffer from these fistulas, and 70 to 80% of these fistulas are complex. So for a fistula to be complex, it has to either affect the anal sphincter, present multiple tract, be recurrent, or be associated with a perianal abscess. Simple fistulas get treated very often with surgery, but this is not an option in the complex fistulas. It's about 120,000 patients suffering from this in Europe and the US alone, and to date, there is no real cure. There are some treatments, which you will see in this page. So patients are being treated with antibiotics, immunosuppressants. A lot of them, definitely in the US, the vast majority of them in standard of care is infliximab, which is the only biological approved for this indication. But as you can see from the slide, there's a big problem with the efficacy and an even greater problem with the relapse. So the problem that these patients have is that once they get taken off the treatment, the fistula reopens again in a vast majority of cases. Okay, so there's no real cure for these patients. What TiGenix has developed is a suspension of allogeneic adipose-derived stem cells with which we treat these fistulas. Okay, so what we do is we inject this suspension into the fistula. We basically, it's a surgical procedure. We go into the fistula, we close with an internal, with a stitch, the internal opening of the fistulas, and then we inject the suspension along the fistula walls of the different tracts. The fistulas have often 2 to 3 tracts. Let me tell you a little bit about the phase 3 that we did. Again, as you know, and as I told you before, we did a small phase 2 to prove the safety of the compound. And we did a pretty big, for this industry, pretty big phase 3 trial. We recruited 289 patients in 50 centers in 8 countries. So we had 7 European countries plus Israel. We measured at 6 months combined remission. Combined remission is defined as the closure of the external opening despite gentle finger compression. And what is very important is also as we did an MRI follow-up of the patients to check that there are no collections greater than 2 centimeters within the fistula tracts. And when you check this, then you can really be sure that the fistula will not reopen again. So there's a real cure. Okay. Secondary endpoints are clinical remission, response, time to clinical remission, and time to response, some perianal disease scores, and also safety and tolerability. Important to understand is the patients we included. So patients included were adult patients who had Crohn's disease, who had the fistulas, who had the luminal disease in remission, meaning that they had a CDIA score below 220. They were being treated for the Crohn's with whatever they were, so immunosuppressants or biologics, most of them. But they had an active fistula, had been active for more than 6 months, despite more than 6 weeks, despite the treatment of the luminal disease. So the fistula was refractory to treatment. What we did is we allowed these patients to continue on the concomitant medication for the Crohn's disease. And the only caveat to this was that the patient could not change the medication or could not alter the dose regimen. Okay? But other than this, so the patient was maintained on a controlled luminal disease through the normal medication and then was treated for the fistula with the cells. You see here the data. So you see both the ITT and the MITT population. The difference between the two is that for the MITT, patients needed to have undergone at least one evaluation after baseline. And you see that we achieved around 50% efficacy in both populations, 51 in the MITT, which compares to 35 for the placebo. What is important to understand is that we not only showed a very superior efficacy to placebo, but also a very superior efficacy to the standard of care or to alternative treatments such as infliximab, which has an efficacy of 23%. Okay? We also proved the favorable safety and tolerability profile of the compound. So just for you to keep, this is the largest randomized controlled clinical trial in fistulas in Crohn's disease patients. We met the primary endpoint, and we met it with a p-value of 0.025. More than 50% of the patients that were treated achieved combined remission at week 24. We are doing a follow-up of 52 weeks, and that data will come out sometime in the second quarter of next year. We showed a favorable safety and tolerability profile, and we're expecting to disclose the full safety and efficacy results at the upcoming Congress of the ECHO in March next year. 601 is today a regulatory de-risked and fully owned asset, so we own all the rights to 601 today. What we're intending to do is to file for registration in the first quarter of next year. And then we are today already discussing partnering options with different companies. The idea is to partner the European commercialization, reserving ourselves some rights in some European countries. In the US, we're also pushing forward. So we did a Type B meeting with the FDA, which confirmed that our preclinical package and CMC package were okay for IND filing for a single pivotal trial in the US. And they also confirmed that we could use our European trial as supportive data for BLA filing. So we're expecting to start a single pivotal trial in the US end of next year. It will be a very similar trial to the European trial, with the difference being the p-value. So the FDA has accepted a p-value of 0.05, which will allow us to recruit some patients less than in Europe, and with the difference being that we will have to treat infliximab-resistant patients. We have signed up Lonza as our CMO in the US. We're now in the middle of the tech transfer, and as said, we expect to start the phase 3 end of next year. Second big achievement that I wanted to share with you today is the acquisition of CorTherapeutics with its lead product, alloCSC01. So CorTherapeutics is a Spanish company. It was a private company based very near our offices in Spain, with a platform of allogeneic regenerative treatments, therapies, to treat cardiac indications. The lead product of CorTherapeutics is alloCSC01, which is the intracoronary administration of the allogeneic cardiac stem cells for the treatment of acute myocardial infarction. CorTherapeutics had a big asset, which was the preclinical dossier, in which they had showed efficacy both in small and large animal models, so in rats and in pigs, a good safety profile and good deliverability. And they were in the middle of a phase 1/2 trial, and actually in September this year, the data was presented at the Congress of the European Society of Cardiology. And as we reported there, we had the first part of the trial, which was a safety trial, reported a good safety profile. And also we reported preliminary data from the efficacy, which showed a reduction in the infarct size and also improvements in the left ventricular ejection fraction. Okay? So the acquisition of CorTherapeutics allowed TiGenix not only to expand its pipeline, but really to enter a real big indication in the cardiac area with a pretty large commercial opportunity by acquiring an asset that had already, a solid preclinical package and was well advanced in the phase 1/2 trial. So it had already met some of the criteria that we were looking for. What we're doing now with CorTherapeutics is the CareMI trial. It's a safety and efficacy trial of the intracoronary infusion of the alloCSC01 in patients with acute myocardial infarction. We're treating patients up to 1 week after infarct. The trial started in June 2014, and we are hoping to conclude the enrollment by end of this year, and with that to present the full data in the first half of 2017 with interim data end of next year as well. Again, the trial is a phase 1/2. Phase 1 was an open-label dose-escalating trial in 6 patients. So we had 3 cohorts of 2 patients each, in which we evaluated 3 different doses. And after the safety results, we initiated a randomized phase of 49 patients, with the highest of the 3 doses evaluated. Last time we reported an update, we mentioned that we had 43 out of the 49 treated patients, of the 49 patients enrolled and treated. So we are really pushing forward to finalize recruitment by end of this year. The primary endpoint is safety, but we do have secondary endpoints with efficacy. And again, we hope to be reporting those between the end of next year and then beginning of to 17. Just to finalize, I mean, we had a busy year, but we have an even busier 3 months ahead and two further years ahead. So we're filing for registration in Europe in the first quarter of next year. We're also finalizing the tech transfer in the US and starting the pivotal trial in the US by end of next year. With ALLO-CSC01, we are finalizing the recruitment and presenting the data. And then we are also initiating a phase 2 in severe sepsis with 611. So I'm happy to answer any questions outside. Great.